So, like any planning, preservation planning is really a roadmap to help a community get to its destinations. A preservation plan expresses community values. It identifies important periods and contexts of history in your community, whether that's mining in the Victorian era or whether it's the auto tourism of the 1940s with neon lights and all that. It helps identify important districts or features of your community as well that you'd like to preserve. That might be the downtown. It might be a cultural landscape such as in San Luis, Colorado's oldest community, the acequias, or what we would call ditches, as well as the Spanish land grant that functions to this day, are an important part of their community. And then a preservation plan really helps to set priorities, whether that's conducting future survey work, designating landmarks or local districts, applying for grants, or creating a heritage tourism program, for example. Preservation plan might address incentives or might direct a community to explore whether you want guidelines or standards for design. And then finally, a preservation plan identifies partnerships, whether that's between the city and your local historical society or the school board, the library, civic organizations, and maybe stewards of important historic buildings such as places of worship. Elks or Oddfellows, often in Colorado, have very historic buildings here. Ideally, preservation planning follows your initial survey work so that you know about your community, what your resources are. It helps to establish consensus, helps to resolve conflicts before they occur, or at least identify what those areas of disagreement are so the community can work towards that before a pressing issue evolves. And then finally, a preservation plan can be an educational document. It can help the community understand what your history and historic resources are. It can help the community understand how preservation helps create a sense of place, and also can teach about best practices such as the Secretary of the Interior standards, or, for example, how your community can acquire funding for preservation work. How does preservation planning differ from comprehensive planning? I would say it's not necessarily that different. A preservation plan is a functional plan, much like a parks and recreation plan, a transportation plan, perhaps an emergency management plan if your community has one of those. One difference is preservation isn't always seen as a core function of government, and so sometimes through the planning process, a community needs to make the case that preservation is a tool to preserve their sense of place and history, that it enhances the environment and fiscal sustainability, that it contributes to the economy through jobs or heritage tourism, for example. Like any plan, preservation plan seeks to establish broad-based public input and support from the community. It's important to survey and research before you plan, and it's important to determine what your community's values are through public meetings, focus groups, surveys, different methods that can be explored. And while you may not resolve every issue through your plan, ideally you can identify those issues. And then also, like other plans, a preservation plan ideally includes an implementation plan. Generally a 5-year plan that sets out goals, objectives, tasks, partnerships to achieve what's in the plan. We often talk about plans sitting on shelves, and we don't want to do that with a well-made plan. Finally, it's important to understand plans aren't set in stone. They're guides, and they evolve as the community evolves. When creating a preservation plan, it's important to identify all the stakeholders beforehand. Coming from the municipal perspective, you may not know who all the stakeholders are, but often stakeholders can help you identify other stakeholders. It's not just preservationists, but property owners, business owners, residents of the community, city departments whose actions might affect historic properties, for example, Elected officials, nonprofit groups, perhaps a library or school district, all may have a place at the table. And really, process can be as important as product when creating a plan. It gets people talking to each other, educating one another, and people feel like they've had a place at the table. It helps with buy-in to the plan, even if not everybody gets everything they want. So once you complete your preservation plan, you want to put the plan to work for your community. A few different ways this could work, and I'll take a couple of examples from Loveland, Colorado, where I worked as a preservation planner. Our preservation plan helped guide staff as well as the Preservation Commission in setting their annual work plans and goals, and from that seeking grants. A few of the things we worked on were designation of historic neighborhoods near the downtown where there was community support, seeking grants for key downtown buildings and building partnerships with property owners, promoting the designation of a downtown historic district, and finally carrying out an education program with, for example, a year-old house workshop to help homeowners understand their historic homes, to educate realtors on staging and marketing historic homes, and eventually evolving into a month-long Historic Preservation Month celebration with 9 or 10 community partners and events. We also, through the plan, tried to address conflicts before they occurred. This wasn't always possible. One thing the plan did is identify those important contexts and properties within the town, but our commission did feel they had to go back and create a top 100 list of important preservation priorities within Loveland, looking in particular at those properties that presented opportunities or were under threat. And this helped work through process when conflicts occurred. For example, when our Parks and Rec department acquired a property near the river for Loveland's new Riverfront Park, they also acquired what turned out to be the county's oldest masonry farmhouse. They couldn't identify a park's use for the property, so rather than tearing it down, they turned it over to the Preservation Commission to work with the community and identify a reuse. And eventually the community came back with a proposal for an interpretive farmhouse that would sit in the park and that would be managed by the Historical Society, so that didn't become a burden to the city. So these situations can become conflicts, but ideally the preservation plan can set the stage for the community to work through and preserve its resources.